All right, welcome back. We are WEBD6201 in the winter 2021 semester at Durham College, and it's week 8, part 1 of our broadcast this week. And we're talking about TypeScript, which is something I've kind of snuck in there a bunch of times with you guys throughout the entire time. So, yes, starter for this week's is last week's ice, absolutely. So, let's get into this. So last week we developed a single page application with Ajax, and we converted all of our HTML pages to views. That's what we did. And actually this is the topic of your current lab that you're working on. This week, what are we going to do? We're going to convert our JavaScript to TypeScript. And we'll talk about why. And this is going to be great for you guys because TypeScript, as you'll see in a second, is in demand when it comes to web development. And things that are due this week. ICE 7 is again due Saturday. I made it due Saturday. Test 3 is out. It's on Ajax. That's due Sunday. I'm going to send out a little announcement later on today to remind everyone to do Test 3. People forget to do their tests. And then Lab 3, just as a reminder, is due next week. You've got lots of times for this. And to be honest with you, I think it's fairly straightforward in order and kind of for you to pull this off. So I think overall, manageable work, I would say, over the next week or so. So where are we? We're sitting at week 8. And again, we're a little bit ahead of the game in terms of what we've done. So Ajax is pretty much done at this point. Next week, we're going to be starting Node.js, which is about a week ahead of where we should be, according to the schedule. So what is TypeScript, and why are we doing it, and why have I talked about it, and why is it important? Let's talk about this a little bit. One thing to note is before I start, I know people need a little bit of support when it comes to YouTube. Just one sec before I forget, because I think what I'd like to do is put in our YouTube recordings live. And this way you'll have a chance to, for those people who need the support, language support, you'll be able to get that live on YouTube as opposed to watching me on Zoom. Okay, so that's where we are right now. Let's get back to this. So again, so why TypeScript? So TypeScript is this open source language that kind of builds on top of JavaScript by adding this static type stuff, right? So static typing is something we're familiar with because we've been doing it with C++ and C# and Java and other languages. Okay, that's what we've been doing, static typing. And what it does, it gives us an ability for us to kind of describe the shape of an object, providing better documentation, right, which is what it is, and amazing tooling, which is really why I use TypeScript in what I do. Not on DC Connect. Hey, Ashok, thank you for that. I put that up there. Thank you. And let me just, sorry, one more. Let me just do that one more time for those people who need it in the other class as well. One sec, guys. I don't want to have someone else miss. Bear with me one sec while let's pop that in there, and then we'll be good to go. Otherwise, I don't want anyone to be excluded, right? Which is the most important part, I think, for me. It's all around inclusion. Let's get into back into this thing for a second. Okay, so yeah, good. All right, so yeah, so that's what TypeScript is and why we use it. So TypeScript was developed by Microsoft. It's a superset of JavaScript, and it was really made for large applications, like applications made with AngularJS. We talked about this kind of Angular last week, and it was created by Microsoft, basically in kind of concert with Google. to make Angular work properly. So one thing to know is that JavaScript programs are valid TypeScript programs for the most part. And TypeScript can be used to develop JavaScript applications for both client-side and server-side execution. So we've talked about client-side, so far this semester. But starting next week, we're going to start with the server-side stuff, which is Node.js, and the new kind of like offshoot from Node.js, which is called Dino, from the creator of Node.js. And you can use different ways of doing something called transcompiling or transpiling, and you can use the TypeScript checker or Babel compiler. I mean, I always use TypeScript myself. That's the way I do it. A little bit of a history of TypeScript and where it came from. Back in 2012, when it was released, 2 years after internal development with Microsoft, I started using it just in late 2012, early 2013. And the reason for this is because I personally needed something to help with game programming on the web. That was the reason why I started to use it. And I realized how powerful it was because it really leveraged my knowledge of object-oriented programming and allowed me to do a lot of the stuff that I could do with OOP. So again, just from with JavaScript, structure my code a little bit better. That's what it allowed me to do back then. And it really taught me the value of things like closures and a bunch of stuff and how JavaScript really works. Kind of not only taught me how to use OOP with JavaScript, but just the back-end stuff, like how it's really working. So then over the course of several years now, TypeScript continues to come up with new releases. It's well supported. So every year or two, they come up with a new major version of TypeScript with minor versions in between. And each version, like I've talked about before, adds additional functionality that is in line with the conventions and compliance in the when it comes to the ECMAScript standards that are coming out for the new versions of JavaScript. So it's like TypeScript introduces something that may be not available yet or well supported from a JavaScript perspective for all browsers, and then JavaScript later on catches up. That's how it's been over the last little while. And still, like we said earlier, TypeScript still supports things that JavaScript hasn't been able to support, like, for example, namespaces, which we're going to talk about today. So how do we do type annotations? Well, basically, it's like this. You have your variable or your parameter, and then right after it, after a colon, you put the type, number or string or whatever it is, a Boolean. And then for functions, so if there's a function, you would say what the function returns, the type the function returns, again, right after the function with a colon. So that is the syntax that you would use in terms of how you would add types. And the primitive types that we use are number, Boolean, and string, again, for JavaScript, but you can also make your own custom types. You can also use, and we'll see this when we start off, weakly or dynamically typed structures. We can make them of type any. And type any is really saying, you know what, TypeScript, we don't want to use you right now. We can turn off TypeScript where we don't need it or we don't want it for code hinting. Again, don't recommend this methodology. If we can avoid it, we want to use strong typing as much as possible, right? So that way we get good tooling, which is what we want, right? The other thing is that we can type annotations can be exported. We can make our own called a declarations file, or and when we make that declarations file, right, what we can do is we can kind of share our documentation, right, and the structure of our code, even if it's written in pure JavaScript. For example, something like jQuery or Node.js has a type declarations file, and a typings file is used to give more support for jQuery and Node and other libraries that are popular. Let's talk about how TypeScript is in demand and why we're doing this. Like I said, if you notice over the last couple of years anyway, GitHub language rankings from 2018 to 2020, TypeScript is number 4 in terms of popularity, in terms of downloads, and the whole project is forked many, many times. And you can see TypeScript is really popular and has been kind of moving up in terms of popularity. There's TypeScript right here, the red line, over the last couple of years. And I think this is a good sign that TypeScript, again, is getting great support and has been accepted by the the web development community, and is continuing to be used in most major projects, which is awesome. So how do we install TypeScript? We're going to do an npm install -g TypeScript, and on that, let's get to it. Let's start off with our in-class exercise. All right. So again, if you looked at the starter for this one, the starter, and it was ICE 7 starter, right, is just the previous ICE 6b. That's what it is. So I've gone ahead and let's do this for a second. I've gone ahead and already have what's this? That's not the wrong thing. I meant to go here. There we go. I've gone ahead and created my week 8A. I've downloaded ICE 6b. Let's make week 8b, which is you guys, right? So let's make it again. So I'm going to extract it like normal. Get rid of this now. I don't need the zip file anymore. And we'll just rename this thing to week 8b. Okay, so that's going to be our starter for us. So I'm going to grab that file. I'm going to pull up VS Code. And I'm going to drag and drop 8b into there to start off with what we're going to do. Okay. And just like normal, what I want to do before I put it up on GitHub is I want to change this to 7b. So that's what it is. And I want to kind of do the git stuff. So git init, git dot, git commit -m, and we'll say initial commit. So all those things are normal. And then what we want, of course, is to put this up on GitHub with a new repository. So let's do that. New WEBD6201 in the winter 2021 semester, and it's ICE 7b. That's you guys, public. And I'm just going to take these last 3 lines of code here like we normally do and right click and press enter, and it should put everything up online. And that'll be the final version for that we're going to use. So again, I'm just going to go up here and refresh, grab this link, and we'll put this as the ICE 7 final. So great link, ICE 7 final. And you can use that to compare your code with my code. Again, that's what it's for, not to submit my code. Some people have done that, and I can't give you marks for something that you haven't done, right? So make sure you, when you submit stuff, it's your stuff, you practice, and that's why I asked you for screenshots and those kind of things. Show me that it's working. All right, so we put this up online. Let's also see where we're at. We're going to do a light server. Right, here's our light server here, and you can see that we're still running the same way we were before. We can log in. This is what we did last time. And once we log in, we get this kind of stuff. This is all good. And what we want to do is do what it said. So I'm going to go to my terminal, and there's a couple ways to do this. So you can do an npm install TypeScript -g. That's the thing that you can do. I've already done it yesterday, so you don't have to do this. I mean, I'm not going to do it here, but that's what you would do. You can issue it here. If that doesn't work, like inside of, and sometimes it won't. As an example, I'm just going to restart this thing. Sometimes it won't inside of VS Code. So what you have to do is pull up a command prompt and do it here. Again, do the same structure for the command prompt. So it'd be like an npm install TypeScript -g. Again, you could do it that way. Or if that fails, and again, I'm talking about what you want to do, you can also pull up a command prompt, like we said before, as administrator by typing in cmd at the window and then run as administrator and then do that same command. Once you do, then you'll have a response like this. If I do if I say something like tsc -v, you can see that the version that I'm using, tsc is the command for TypeScript. tsc -v version 4.23 is what you should have, or something like that as of this recording. All right, so that's where we're at with this. All right, so are you with me? Do you have TypeScript installed at 4.2.3? Nicholas says no. Andre's good. Muzda's good. Nicholas, what's going on? Pat started a new repo. Okay, I'll give you a minute. Thank you, guys. The rest of you guys for responding as well. So now that we have TypeScript installed, this is kind of our first step, and that is the installation step to make sure that TypeScript is supported on your system. We use the -g switch, right? -g, so that it's global. We could also make TypeScript work only locally. So if I had a local project and I said, well, I only want to make it work for this project, but not globally. Sometimes that's good too, because you want to support a TypeScript version that is specific for a particular project. But most of the time we do a global installation when we're working with TypeScript. What about this tsconfig.json thing? What is that? tsconfig.json is required for TypeScript. And remember, when we were using TypeScript, up online, when we went to the TypeScript playground, so if I went to typescriptlang.org and I was going to the TypeScript playground here, you can see that up on the top here, there's a tsconfig area. And tsconfig basically tells TypeScript how to convert from TypeScript to JavaScript, right? So you can see that the target, I can specify what that is. I can say I want ES6 or ES 2015, which is kind of equivalent. I don't want to support React right now, so let's just say none. My module pattern is going to be common.js, right? As an example. And then you can specify things like no implicit any, strict null checks, right? As opposed, and a bunch of other stuff. Always strict, I think, is always a good one. No implicit this, and a bunch of other strict checks that you can put on. I'm just going to turn on no implicit any and always strict. If I want linter checks, I can do that. No implicit returns, and so on. And there's some advanced functionality as well as experimental features that you can turn on right up here if you like to. So that's kind of all the things that you can do. And once you select these features, right, as an example with TypeScript, then what it'll do is it converts from TypeScript into JavaScript, something that's recognized by the compiler. All right, so that's kind of important to do. And notice it says export. So I can open as a markdown link. I can open in TypeScript a viewer of some sort or whatever. I can also specify which version. Notice that this version here is 4.23, and there's other things to do as well. Okay, so but this is an example of how what our tsconfig looks like from online, and we're going to do the same thing with our tsconfig file locally. On that, let's make a tsconfig file. It's going to look like this, tsconfig.json. We're going to put it inside of our project. So again, going back to our project, I want to go and make a new tsconfig.json file. And on that, I want to put in two curly braces, and I want to say that I want to use control space. Control space is going to bring up some options. I'm going to choose compiler options. And under compiler options, I'm going to choose a couple things. The first thing is the target. So my target, what am I targeting? Is it ECMAScript 3, ECMAScript 5? If you wipe that out and press Control Space again, it'll give you a list of targets, of viable targets too. For example, ECMAScript 2015, 2016, and so on. All right. Let's choose ECMAScript 2015 as an example, which is a good target. That's equivalent to ECMAScript 6, right? The other thing we want after target is the module type. So Control Space, and if I type in module, then you can see that the module type is CommonJS, right? We also want to support, like we said before, source maps. Source maps are giving us the ability to do some troubleshooting or debugging with TypeScript. These are the basics: target, module, source map. Those are the three things we need. We can also add in some strict rules. So strict, if I put, remember we had strict null checks and no implicit any. If I put like no implicit any, I think that's a good one. So that means we will not, accept anything that has an object. And if you look here back to the what no implicit any means, enable error reporting for expressions and declarations with an implied any type, which means if I don't declare a type, it'll give me an error. All right, so that's one thing I want. I also want always strict. Let's see if we can put that in. I'm using the exact same things here. So if I press Control Space and I say always strict, I think this is good. Always strict basically says, hey, you know what? I'm always going to put a use strict for each file, right? So I don't have to put it in myself. Again, compiler options, right? So those are the things that I want to use. And remove comments is also useful because a lot of times people can look at our comments in JavaScript, and because we're making a TypeScript project, why would I want to inflate the JavaScript file with additional comments? It's not required. So I'm going to remove comments as well. So I'm going to say that remove comments is true, right? So those are my compiler options that I've chosen this time around. All right, so that is step one. Step one is always make a tsconfig.json file. Once you make it, then like it says here in the PowerPoint, it says that as soon as I see a tsconfig.json, then what we're doing is this specifies that the project and the root of the project is a TypeScript project. So now I've started the conversion process, right, by making a tsconfig.json file. Okay, so that's step one. So that's the first thing. All right, let's do some basic things now. So the next step is really looking at my package.json file. And I have some dependencies that I have right now. I have Fort Awesome, which is a project, Popper.js, Bootstrap, and jQuery. We use jQuery for a lot of our stuff. So wouldn't it be nice if we get some really great support from TypeScript for jQuery to give us additional type hinting and code hinting? Remember what we have right now. If I go to scripts and if I go to app, and if I hover over the $, right? Take a look at that. I get jQuery static, okay? If I hover over the get, I get some stuff. I get some stuff here. But under $, I get nothing. I get just like one thing, right? Same thing when I come over here, I get some code hinting. This is built in now to VS Code, right? And I start getting some stuff with this, but there could be additional things I can get if I use TypeScript. Let's see how this works. So I can do, when I want to include a library that I'm using and I want support for, whether it's Node in the future or something else, especially if it's a library that you're trying to use that doesn't have great support or is not as popular. For example, something like 3JS or something like that. If you're doing WebGL, you can use type annotations and you can use yarn for that. So again, let's go back and see what that looks like with package.json. If I do yarn add, and then under yarn add, I said at types. This is basically saying I want type hinting for a specific library, / and the name of the library, for example, jQuery, right? And then I want it to be a developer dependency, not a dependency for the project. So this is for me, not for the project to work, all right? So if I press enter, now what it does, it goes out, grabs type hinting for jQuery at a specific version and puts it in. notice that my version for jQuery is older. Remember, we just downloaded jQuery recently. And then the type hinting. So things have improved. Remember that with Yarn, I can also add a different version of jQuery. So I can say yarn add jQuery at, and I can specify the version 3.5.5, right? As an example. Let's see how that works. So if I did that, it says, is there a version of 3.5.5, right? 3.5.5 is the version that types. But notice that Yarn is very intelligent, and in that it looks at all the versions that are available to download right now, right? So even though type hinting was done at 3.55, 3.51 seems to be the latest version that matches 3.5. There's also a 3.6, but I don't want that. All right, so I'm not going to grab later version of jQuery because I'm going to have, these are going to be mismatched. All right, so cool. So I've got this jQuery stuff. What does this do for me? Does it assist me when it comes to doing things with my app.js? So if I hover over again, it says jQuery static. If I go to this, it looks the same, but you're going to see additional functionality when it comes to using jQuery and other languages just off the top, as an example, because of what TypeScript does for us. Now remember, it gives us some hinting, but where we get the most use of it is when we start converting our files from JavaScript to TypeScript, which is really what our exercise is this week. So let's do that first. Let's put this up on GitHub. So we just added a tsconfig.json file. So we'll say git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say we added a tsconfig .json file. And then git push, which is going to push everything off to GitHub. So that's the first step. First step is always, hey, can the steps you're talking about, Nicholas, are to how to install TypeScript. Again, pretty simple. We just do a npm install TypeScript -g and press enter, and then that'll install TypeScript. Okay. So. Oh, package.json. That would be a yarn add at types jQuery --dev. That'll do the add everything to the package.json file, support for jQuery as well. All right, so that's just showing you how to do support for a library with JavaScript, so with TypeScript. Okay, so excellent, we're good. I want to start the conversion process now. That's our exercise for this week. And today we're going to do the conversion, and then tomorrow we're going to add additional functionality. All right, so let's go back into my app.js, and my app.js is a lot of lines of code. Right now we're sitting at around 500 lines or 450 lines of code. That's a lot to convert at once. Let's start with something smaller. We're going to start with our contact.js. So contact.js has a core up here as well as a bunch of other stuff, our class, and I want to start doing this one. So the way to convert from TypeScript to JavaScript, or JavaScript to TypeScript, is rename this thing. That's the first thing we want to do. Rename from .js to .ts, and you'll see that it actually changed the icon here for you. And then it starts presenting these problems. But man, remember what this is. These aren't problems. This is tooling. This is good. I want to see red. Red means something is missing. And what's missing from TypeScript is the types, right? And from classes, it's like, remember classes, how it works in classical inheritance. You have to declare the variables as instance variables, right? Private instance variables. So the way they work, classical inheritance says that we need to make private instance variables, let's say, for example, full name, and we have to declare the type. So this is a string type, as well as a contact number, let's say, which is also a string. And we also have in the email address, which is also a string. So those are the things that will take away those errors. Okay, and the reason why we have to do this is because think about this in a classical example, for example, with C++ or with C#. How are you going to use a object that hasn't been declared yet? You can't, right? So this is what TypeScript gets you to do, and then it declares the types up front. That's what those do. And so you get good code hinting. Now we have to change our getters and setters a little bit. Our getters return a string, and the value of the setter is a string. So this is basically going to help us when it comes to passing things into the class, to say that it's a string that we're outputting and a string that's going in. Let's do the same things with the other ones. Again, the method is returning a string. This one, the parameter, is of type string. Notice I'm not putting a void parameter after the set because it would error out. That's the one place you don't put parameter after set. Getters and setters are special. They work slightly differently than everything else. Email address, again, we're going to return a string, and we're also going to take in a string. Awesome. So that takes care of all the type annotations we need for getters and setters. Okay, the rest is the same. Constructor is the same. Notice here we have full name, contact number, and email address, all strings. This is good. And now they connect nicely with our parameters. ToString method, that has to be now public. We need to declare it as public. By default, any methods or variables are private unless you specify otherwise. So public, and it's going to return a string. Okay. Same thing with the ToJSON. Public is going to return an object this time. Okay, so this is interesting. I'm going to return an object. How do I return? This is a kind of a custom object, right? This isn't a special object. We're going to deal with this later on, maybe tomorrow, and I'll talk about how to make this more interactive for us. All right, meanwhile, I want to take in an object. This is where we're going to have a little bit of challenge. So again, public, this is an input from JSON. It's going to return void, right, as an example, but my data is actually going to be a data object. Uh-oh, this is where we're going to have a problem. I can't say object because objects have no idea. Objects may not have a full name. It tells you full name does not exist on type object. It does not exist. Like there's no object that has full name, contact number, or email address, right? So this is no good, right, the way we have it. And so this is the first time that we're going to have, if I put the type as JSON as an example, which is what it is, again, we can say that full name is not of type JSON. It's not, because JSON doesn't have these things by default. We have to define it differently. So that's one thing. And so for now, let's just put any. And this is the first time, and again, tomorrow we're going to fix this problem. But any is something that that allows us to bypass or silence the error. All right, be careful because this basically takes away the need for TypeScript in the first place. So you don't want to use too many any's. This is just to convert what we have from JavaScript to TypeScript. And sometimes we start off with any, and then we go back later on and fit the right type. All right, let's keep going. So serialize, it's public, and it's going to return a string. Okay, that's what it's going to return. Or null, right? A string or null. So serialize, that's okay. And these are good. And again, deserialize, we're going to return void. That's what it returns here. Now data this time is of type string array. And the way you can do that is you can say that it's a string array, like so. String array. And if it's a string array, right, then what happens is you can use a split. Split does not exist on type string array, it says. Okay. So think about that. Is it a string array or a string, right? So this is a string array, but this is just a regular string. Let's put that back as a string and see how that works. So if data is a string, then this becomes a string array because this data split converts the string into an array of little substrings, right? You can be explicit like this if you really want to, or you can just be implicit and it will define the type based on what you assign it, like in other languages. All right, for example, if you use the auto keyword in C++ or the var keyword in C#, it will do a implicit casting or implicit typing of the type. But this would be explicit typing. I'm telling you exactly what it is. I'm overriding what it detects is this thing that I'm assigning. Okay, so this is okay. One more thing we missed here is in our documentation is at returns. We probably want to put void in there from a documentation perspective. Okay, good. Let's keep going. So we've got this, and then finally we got this error down here. And it says, what are you trying to do here? Core doesn't exist. Core doesn't exist in this file. What are you saying, right? Why doesn't it exist? I mean, sure, it's here, right? But how come you're trying to do this, it's saying? Well, we have core in our namespace.js. That's core, right? But it's not recognizing that this is what's happening. So what we can do is rename this namespace.js. Let's rename this right now. Rename it to TS, right? And now core needs a type. Uh-oh. Can't implicitly cast as any. It needs to be a type. We know that in our contact at the bottom, we're basically saying that core is either a undefined, an any, or it's a it's an object, one of the two, right? So that's what you can do. You can do in your type declarations up here, you can say core is either, right, any, or, right, it is something else. It is an object, all right? That's what you can do. You can actually say that it's one of the two. We don't know which one, okay? And if it's any, once you put any in there, right, then again, it'll silence most of the errors. But take a look. It just silenced those errors. But here's something. Core.contact is going to be assigned. If we took away the any part and just said, well, core is of type object, right? And if I go back to contact, it says, you know what? Core contact does not compute on object. Doesn't make any sense because objects don't include contact by default. And there is no contact that you've defined, therefore this would fail, right? Let's put that back to what it was. So when we say, we declare multiple types in TypeScript mean it's not multiple types. It could be either one or the other, depending on how you change it. Okay. All right, so cool. We have TypeScript files and we want to convert them. Remember the rule. The rule is that at the end, the last slide basically tells you browsers only recognize JS files, right? This is bad. Trying to do an app.ts would be very bad. This is good, app.js. So we need to transpile from TypeScript to JavaScript. And Visual Studio Code has a support for transpiling from TypeScript to JavaScript as long as TypeScript is installed. In our case, it's installed, right? And the way you would do that is you're going to use Control-Shift-B to pull up some options. The options are going to be either a build or watch option. The build option allows us to just build the project, the JavaScript files, to produce JavaScript files from TypeScript. The watch option watches for any changes to the entire project. Personally, I like to use the watch option. It builds, it does what this does, and it constantly waits for any changes. This is good because imagine when you're coding and you're like, wait, how come it's not working? I just programmed this in TypeScript, but I don't see a change on the browser. Well, of course you don't see a change. You haven't converted it. You haven't transpiled from TypeScript to JavaScript. And so JavaScript changes haven't taken hold. And so your functionality doesn't work. So instead of going through that process, I like to just automatically change, update. Now, this may not always be the right solution, especially if you have some changes you want to do in certain places. You might have sub tsconfig.json files in different parts of your project, and so you only want to compile there. But for us right now, TSC watch is what we want to do inside VS Code. So let's go back to VS Code and make that work. So again, here I want to convert my TypeScript files into JavaScript. I'm going to press Control, Shift, and B. It's going to pull up this little functionality. It should do the same thing for you. And I'm going to choose TSC watch. Once I do that, it converts everything from TypeScript to JavaScript, right? Notice it did that. And if there's any errors, it'll report them here. It successfully did that. It converted. Let's take a look at my namespace. So namespace TS converted to namespace JS with use strict. Look at that. It added use strict on top of it. I didn't have it here, but it added it here. Okay. And also our contact TS, right? So here's our contact TS. It converted our contact TS to a contact JS, and it put use strict. It also removed all of my comments, which is really good. Okay. Control-Shift-B, Andre. Control-Shift-B. It's in the PowerPoint. All right. A couple of things to note. We didn't need to use strict because it implements it anyway. So let's get rid of it from here. We don't want to use strict twice. We don't need to. And let's continue with the process. First of all, what I want to do is I want to go to the command prompt here, right? And I want to put this up on GitHub. We've converted things to for our contact. Let's do this. We'll say git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say converted contact.js to TypeScript, and then git push. So this converts. We've converted contact to TypeScript, right? And we're going to continue. Notice that we get a bit of file bloat. What's happening here in my scripts folder? I'm going to get like 3 files now: TS file, a JS file, and a JS map. We'll deal with this tomorrow in a way that makes more sense, right, than what's happening here. Okay, so scripts, and we got a bunch of file bloat, which is happening here. Okay, but that's okay. Let's continue. I'm going to go with the next one, which is our user. User is very similar to our contact, and we're going to do the same thing. So first, again, right-click and rename. That's the first step. Rename this to TS as opposed to JS, right? One thing at a time, always is what we do. Again, just like before, we have our class user. We don't need use strict. We know it's going to be added in later for us in the other file, right? And we're going to start typing in our instance variables. Remember, we have to do that for all classes. We're going to make them private. We don't have to, but we're going to make them private. And it's going to be m_displayname, which is of type string, and m_email address, which is of type string, and m_username, right, which is of type string. Notice that those are the ones we have. And then the last one is password, right? So again, private m_password, which is of type string. Just like we did last time, our getter is returning a string, and it's taking in a string, returning a string, taking in a string, returning a string, taking in a string. Okay, returning a string, taking in a string. So these are all the things that we've done. And all we're doing is we're basically adding information to our file to help us with code hinting. That's all we've done here. All right, and again, you can see that this is all good. Strings tells us that it's optional. The square brackets tell it's optional, and so on. And now we're going to go back to our public toString method. So public toString, it's going to return a string. A public toJSON, it's going to return an object. Okay, we know that that's what it's going to return, an object. A public from JSON, it's going to return void. So we need to put that in our comments. Right? And from JSON, we get data, and the data is of type JSON. We don't know what it is, but we're going to get display name, email address, username, and password. And it's going to be JSON data. Again, we don't know what it is. I'm just going to put any to silence it for now. We're going to come back later on and fix this problem. But for now, we're just going to silence this so we can move on and get rid of our errors and continue. Public serialize it's going to return string. Okay, pretty cool. And finally, public deserialize, it's going to return void, but my data is going to be of type string. Excellent. We've done everything we need to do for our user.ts. And notice that it automatically transpiled from TS to JS. Why? Because we're having the watch task function. The watch task, which is running right now in our terminal. Notice if I go back to this is our watch task. It's running and it's waiting, and it's basically converting anything that we have, any change we make to our files, automatically transpiles to JavaScript, which is what we needed to do. All right, so that is our user.ts. Let's put this up on GitHub. Every time we do a change like that, we put it up on GitHub. So clear git add dot git commit -m. We'll say converted user.js to TypeScript and git push. So we convert one thing at a time. That's what we do. And in a larger project, this can take a bit of time. So Nicholas is saying, don't forget to turn this into a string. We don't have to. Remember I said you can do it implicitly or explicitly. Here, it's implicitly done. So it already is a string array. I don't have to do it because I'm assigning a string, right, as an example. And split creates, it returns a string array. That's what it returns up here. And so that's what it's casting. It's basically doing implicit data typing. Okay, I don't have to do it. Same thing with these ones. If these are all, notice, string arrays, right? Look, these are all, the property type is a string array. If I hover over, each of the objects, right, is a string element. Okay, cool, I like it. Let's go to the router next. So we're going to convert router next. So again, router, I'm going to right click and rename. Router was the thing that allowed us to do routing in the front end. So I'm converting it to TypeScript. As soon as I do that, it automatically transpiles it. Look at that. It transpiled that automatically, right? Let's go into the top. We can get rid of use strict. And we have our active link. That's the first thing you want to change. So again, this is inside of our, sorry, not in the constructor, in the class. Again, just going to reorganize things a little bit. In the class here, I'm going to put in our instance variables. So instance variables for the router. The router has active link. So private m_active link, which is of type string. Okay, so that takes care of this error. All right, and then we have getters and setters. We're going to get, it's going to return a string, and we're going to get a link, which is of type string. Okay, so that's the getter and the setter. Cool, cool. All right, and when we go back to our public methods, we need to put public in front of add. The root is going to be of type string, right, that we're adding. And then it says m routing table. We have no idea what routing table is, Tom, right? By the way, how about these little arrows, you know, or these little light bulbs? It says I can declare a property if I want right from the light bulb. So instead of me doing it like this, I'm going to say declare property. And what this does is it puts it up here, and by default this is private. So I can do it here, but it'll declare it as a type any. We know the routing table is not a type any. Think about what the routing table is. The routing table is something that we're going to do a index of or whatever, right? A routing table is a table, is an array of strings. That's what it is. So that's what we have to do here. It's the first time we're doing that. So we're saying a routing table is an array of strings, right? A string array, right? And this is where it helps us define what it does. If I go back down to the routing table now, you can see that routing table.push makes sense because push works on a string array. Okay, I'm pushing a string to the string array. Okay, how about add table? So this is public add, it returns void. But how about my add table? This is a public function, right? And it returns void. But the routing table is a string array. So we're going to take a string array, and we're going to basically make the string array get a reference from the string array that we get here, and pass the reference to the routing table. Next, public find. It returns void. Actually, sorry, it doesn't return void. It returns a number. Okay, it returns the number. The route that we take in is a string. So there we go. And it returns a number. And public remove, it returns a Boolean. All right, so it tells us that it is, and the string is or the route is a string. Okay, again, pretty simple translation so far. And finally, toString method, which is our own custom toString method. It's not an override. Okay, so public toString does this. Cool. Uh-oh, the heck is all this stuff? This does not belong in the class. Let's make a little to-do. So note, to-do, need to move the code below into its own file, right? Because we don't want to kind of have a class declaration and an implementation at the same time. What's the error you're getting? Nicholas is getting error with his declarations. Declaration or statement expected. You have to give me some more details. So the declarations you're talking about up here, these. Yeah, you shouldn't get these errors. Because all I'm doing is I'm declaring these things. Make sure, again, you convert this to a TS file, right? 7.5. Yeah, you shouldn't have that error at all. You shouldn't have that problem. I'm not getting it. I'm not sure why you are. Because all we're doing is we're just declaring stuff. Make sure, again, it's inside the router, the class router, where you put it, like this. I'm not sure why you'd be getting that error. You shouldn't. I would ignore it for now. Okay, so scrolling down though, you can see again, what I was saying was like all of this is unnecessary. I shouldn't put this in here. I should put it somewhere else. All right, so what does this look like when I convert? If I go back to my router.js, you can see that it uses use strict, it reorganized stuff, and it removed all my comments, right? And this is pretty cool. It's working nicely. All right, let's put this up on GitHub. And then what I want you guys to do is just compare your code to my code. Maybe that'll help you. Maybe. So I'm going to say git add dot git commit -m, and we're going to put we're going to say converted router.js to TS, and I'm going to push that up on GitHub. So we've converted everything, but notice that we're using core over and over and over again, and really what we have is that TypeScript supports namespaces, right? So if I go to my router.ts, one of the problems I'm having is if I hover over it, doesn't give me anything, no support. This is no good because router doesn't know what router is or core, because core could be anything, right? Because core could be any or an object. So this isn't any good. I don't want that kind of support. That's why I'm using TypeScript in the first place. How can I change this? Well, let's get rid of our namespace.ts altogether. Because really, if you think about it, we can make a namespace like this happen on top of every file. Let me explain. So first, get rid of namespace.ts completely. There's three files. Right-click, delete, please. Once we delete them, we get some errors because contact doesn't know what it is, and neither does router. All these threes have errors now. Let's fix this. Start with contact. At the top, where it has core, blah, 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 put a space in there and say this, namespace core, right? That's what I want you to put up there, namespace core. And then at the bottom, way at the bottom of the file, get rid of all this stuff. You don't need that anymore. right? And then also get rid of this. You don't need that because that is not required. So save. But one thing you do need is you need to make sure this class is exported. So you need to put an export in front of the class, like so. Export class contact. Let's do the same thing for router. So router, all the way to the top, I want to get rid of this thing that says core and put in namespace, right, is core. And way at the bottom, down in here, I want to get rid of this, core router is equal to router, as well as all of this. So we don't need that anymore. So save. But we do need to export the class router so we can use it other places. Export does that iffy for us. That's what it does. And if I scroll down now, and if I hover over router, I get a lot more information. Look at that. Add table gives me some code hinting from what we did. This is how I want TypeScript to work. Finally, user.ts. We need to fix this part. So up at the top here, again, I replaced the core to namespace, right? We're just declaring the namespace core and the class inside of it. We want to export the class. And at the bottom, we want to get rid of this part, as well as core user is equal to user. You don't want that. And save. Now those three things are converted, but we know app.js, when we convert it from app.js to app.ts, that's going to have the same problem. One thing also is we have this isLoggedIn method. And notice once we have a fragment like this that says contact list HTML, this is a good hint that we're not using this isLoggedIn JavaScript function anymore. Let's get rid of it. So right click and delete. IsLoggedIn is gone. Also, you know, while we're deleting, let's just delete all of our old content too. So all the old content, that whole folder, delete that. We already converted it from last week anyway. So now we have a slimmer project. Okay. Let's start converting app.js. So again, at the top of app.js, we want to convert this from JS to TS. This is going to be a lot more work because of the amount of lines here. So again, I'm just going to rename the file from app.js to app.ts. Okay, and just like we did before, I need to change a few things. I'm going to start with the namespace this time. Let's get rid of useStrict. In fact, let's get rid of all this stuff at the top. And let's do this, namespace core. All right, so that's the first part, namespace core. Let's skip all the way down to the bottom. We're just going to use our file down here and get rid of the bottom part. And we're going to get rid of this part. Okay. Now we're not going to share start anymore, so I'm not going to export it. If I wanted to share a function, I would just put export in front of the function name. Okay, I'm not going to do that here. So that's namespace core. So I'm going to go all the way up now to the top and start converting each function. This is functional. This is not a class. Our class app.ts, there's no class, but I'm going to start converting this from one thing to the other. So notice that our page name parameter is of type string. Let's put that in there, string. Our function is going to return void. We do not put public in front of our function because this is not a class. This is a file that's using the classes, right? So function is good. We leave the function keyword. Notice we didn't use the function keyword anywhere here in our methods because we don't use, these are methods. If I put a function in front of this, it would error out. Okay, this is looking at contact.ts here. But in our app.ts, we would use function because this is not a class. Okay, let's continue as I go down. So string is page name, right? Any declarations we make down here is again is there's going to be some areas here that we're going to have to correct. All right, function, load content. The parameter is of type function and the page name is of string. Let's do that. So we'll say page name is string. The callback is a function. Let's make this a function. All right, that's the callback. And it returns void. Okay, again, notice that up here, we return void for our load header. And down here, we return void for our load content. Okay. Nice, nice. Let's continue. Load footer. Load footer returns void, right? And let's put our nice little, since we're here, let's put some comments in here. So we'll say that this function loads the page footer. Display home, we're not going to comment everything, but display home returns void. Hell, everything else returns void too. So display about for now returns void. Display services returns void. Test full name returns void. Doesn't return anything. We could make it return a Boolean, but we don't right now. And as I scroll down, I get to this. Why am I getting a problem here? I mean, I never had a problem before with jQuery. It worked. It doesn't mean that there isn't a potential issue. What this does is it says test is expecting a string. Look what test expects. So test, which is testing the regular expressions, it expects a string. But what we're passing it in when I go to value, remember I did the jQuery thing? Look what it gives it, string or a number or a string array. It can be anything that I get past the test. And if I pass a string array to test, it will fail. If I pass something else, a Boolean, or sorry, a number to the test function, it will fail. So in order for me to confirm that my value is of type string, I need to put a toString at the end. ToString will make sure that the value is converted to a string, whatever it is, and so that test can deal with it. And this silences the error. All right, so this is void. Same thing here, so toString. I know there's going to be a bunch of times we use this, so let's just copy this whole thing and we can use it somewhere else. Test email address is a void, and we're going to do toString right there. Right, that's going to silence that error. Form validation is returning void. It doesn't really do much, right? It kind of takes all these three functions in here and puts them all into one. We have to maybe revisit this one and think about what we're doing here. Display contact returns void, right, as an example. And what the heck is this? Well, what this is basically saying is that, okay, I'm getting a, hey jQuery, I want you to get something. And what is this thing? Well, it says that I'm looking for an ID of type subscribed checkbox, and I want to make, the object checked. Let's break this down into two steps. Let's declare an object. We'll say let, right? We'll call it subscribed checkbox, right? Equal to this. What do we get when we do that? TypeScript is fancy enough to know what it is. It's an HTML element, and it says basically that, hey, checked doesn't exist on an HTML element. Well, TypeScript has some really fancy ways of doing this. I want to convert this from a regular HTML element. I want to tell it that the shape of this thing is actually an input element. So I can say something like this. I can say as, if I put input element, if I start typing that, and let's hope that it'll get it, HTML input element. There we go. If I use the as keyword, what it does is it casts it, right, and provides additional properties to the checkbox. Notice now, instead of a regular HTML element, it's an HTML input element. If I did this, and I kind of replaced this part here with subscribed checkbox, I'll be okay. Now there's no error. Why? Because checked works, right? Checked works on a input element. Input element has a checkbox. That's one type of it, right? Here's other problems we have here, right? We have, before this was working, and the reason why this was working because implicitly full name, contact number, and email address was found in the form, right? And if you look at the view for this one, let's split screen for a second. And if I look at the view for the form, so if I go to content and I look at the contact form, right, here's my contact form. Notice that we have some properties, right? One of them is contact number, full name as an ID, and so on. So that's what's happening here. I have to get a reference to the ID now because there is no explicit conversion. TypeScript's like, wait, we may not get anything here, guy. What are you trying to do, right? So what it's looking for is something that looks like this. So full name is equal to, hey, I want to get something with an ID of full name, and I want to get the first element that matches this, and it's as an HTML input element. That silences the problem because value actually is something that is good. By the way, if I just did this, it's not good because it says value does not exist on HTML HTML element, a regular HTML element. Okay, so but an HTML input element, that works. Let's do a copy paste here a couple times. So we're going to say that this would be contact number, and this would be email address, and this would be contact number, and this would be email address. And that solves this issue. And you're like, wait, we didn't have an issue before. How is it we have an issue now? It's not that you have an issue. It's that you have a potential problem with your code. And what this is doing for you is basically saying, hey, here's a warning. You have a problem with your code potentially. If I pass this to somebody else, it may fail. Okay. Let's continue. Display contact list. We're going to say returns void, right? As an example, we're going to keep going. Here's something. Let data is equal to string, right? This is implied, right? Because I'm assigning a string to it, right? So that's something that I've done there. I could also just do this now. I can just say data is of type string. And that would be the same thing, right? Data is of type string. So you can do both. Again, we're just converting now. So I want to make as minimal changes as possible as we move. All right, so let's keep going. Same thing with contact. Contact is of type contact now. You can see that. Contact data is of type string, deserializing it, and so on. This is good. Okay, we're going to keep moving until we have another problem. Here's the next problem, which is .toString. All right, that was the problem that fixed this issue. Display edit returns void. Again, all I'm doing is I'm starting just to go through and we're converting everything so it's typed as much as possible where it makes sense. If it's implicit like this, that's okay, right? As long as I have a type. If it reads a type, I'm good. And as I keep going, now I come to this part. And it says, I don't know what you're trying to do here. Contact.fullname is value. Full name is a string, but value is not a string. Value can be a string, a number, or a string array. Same thing. We don't know. It can't guarantee that it's going to be a string. So therefore, we need to make sure that it's a string coming inbound. It would work the other way, but what this does is it validates and presses it. It pushes it to become a string. All right, that's what this does. Awesome. So we're almost done. Going back to display login is void. So these are all good. Display login looks like we've got no issues. And display register we haven't dealt with yet. We're going to do that next week. Toggle login. All right, this also displays returns void, right? Toggle login. And as we move towards the bottom, authguard also returns void. Display 404 returns void. And now we come to active link callback. Active link callback returns something. Active link callback returns a function. So this is where we want to return a function with a capital F function, right? And the active link is a string. And we can actually do a document this to basically say something like this function associates and returns a related callback to a route. That's what it does, right? Notice it said at returns was in there. The param went in there nicely, active link, and the function is what it returns. Nice, nice. Excellent. And then finally, start returns void. And this is where we do our start function. This is the entry point for our program, right? We can see that. This is the entry point for our program. A lot of times you might see this called main. I just called it start, right? But this is where the program would start right here. And you can see what it does is it does app started. All right, it loads the header, it loads content for the first active link, and then it loads the footer. And then what it does, it waits for the window to load in order for us to do this. Let's save this file and let's take a look and see how it converted. So I go back to app.js. You can see that it nicely converted everything back to jQuery, right? Just like it was before with our additions. There's our addition, right? And it's perfect jQuery formatted in a beautiful way that works for JavaScript. So it uses not my version of formatting when I'm doing coding, but actually a nice way of doing it, okay? Later on in this course, if we have a chance to, we can do compression, where we can compress the JavaScript file so it looks like a minified file. And remember that minified files basically take away all white space and rename variable names, where necessary, so that way you can reduce space. Okay, so that's what kind of really cool stuff that you can do. And why we minimize, we minify file or minimize or minify files. We do this because we want to reduce the time it takes for the browser to interpret the actual file itself. The browser actually reads all the files and ignores spaces. If we don't have any spaces to ignore, it's faster, right? So it's pretty good. All right, so that is app.js. Let's put this up on GitHub. So we're going to say things like git add dot, git commit -m. We're going to say converted app.js to TypeScript and performed cleanup, which is what we did. Two things, git push. So we kind of cleaned up some files, removed some stuff that wasn't necessary, and so on. All right, one thing we haven't done here in this first part is test to see if this even works. We've done all this conversion. We have no clue if this works. All right, so let's do this now. So let's do a light server. And let's see if we get everything that we got before, or somehow it fails. Well, we know automatically if we get this, and we can do this, we're beautiful, right? Because this means that all of our code is working. Remember, because this is all code-driven. My entire website is code-driven now. It's not driven by pages. It's actually a single page application. So if I get something here, it's great. Log in. Let's try logging in. And log in. And we're good. We're beautiful. How does this look online, though? One thing is we tested it locally, TypeScript, we converted it, and everything else works. Remember that, like we said before, in our VS Code, and if I look at my index.html, there is no reference whatsoever to TypeScript. It's all JavaScript. One thing we have extra we don't need is this namespace.js that does not exist anymore. This will cause an error, right? And it probably already does. Let's get rid of it. So no namespace.js required, doesn't exist anymore. But our router.js does, right up there. So that's something we have to consider. The other thing you have to consider is the order of loading. All right. Right now we have all of our files loaded after our page loads. But remember what we talked about before, that we don't have to wait for the page to load for things like classes. We don't need to. Classes and things that do not depend on the page load can be loaded right inside the head of the document. And that's not a bad thing to do, right? We want to load stuff in the body after the body. For example, our app.js depends on the page being loaded to some degree. So this is where we want our app.js to be loaded down here. Same thing with jQuery. as an example, and Bootstrap. Bootstrap is going to apply changes to the page. jQuery is going to work on the page. So we want jQuery, I mean, theoretically though, jQuery can also be loaded inside the header because it's a library and it doesn't depend on the page load whatsoever. But typically we put this stuff at the bottom, okay? But anything we can do to top load our JavaScript up here, as an example, so it happens right away, it's a good thing, right? Why? Because it's part of the buffer before the page loads. All right, this is good, and I've saved it. I made a change to remove our namespace.js that's not important. Let's add a new thing here and go git add dot, I'll be okay. Git commit -m, and I'll say removed namespace.js from index.html. Git push. All right, so that's pushing everything up to GitHub. Let's run this thing live like we did before. So again, to do that, I'm going to go, and this is the last part so far of today. I'm going to go back up to here, look at our repo. And what I want to do with our repo is I want to publish the repo. So settings. I'm going to go to, if I scroll down to GitHub pages, I'm going to change this from none to main and click save. And that will publish everything online. It'll take a moment to propagate. So if I go back to the main page there, what we're waiting for is a check mark to occur in our commit. Notice that there is no deployment. The deployment would be seen here if there was a deployment, right? And if we refresh one more time, you can see that indeed we have a check mark and there is an environment that we have here. If I check GitHub pages now and I go to view deployment, it's going to show my page. Now take a look at what it did. It said, I'm going to Durham Programmer GitHub, blah, 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 and it's going to slash, and I'm getting page not found. Why is it getting me a page not found? This is interesting. Home, that works. About, project, services, contact, login, right? Let's try login. Let's log in. And we get a 404, right? A contact list. Look at what's trying to do. It's trying to go to contact list. And of course, this is GitHub's 404. So this is a pathing issue, right? This is a pathing issue. So remember how this works, right? The reason why this isn't working, contact list here on our page, is because, well, GitHub pages is, our project is not the only page on GitHub pages. There's lots and lots of them. So when I do slash something, that means go to GitHub, and I want to go to the root of GitHub. Well, root of GitHub, there's like thousands of developers out there, millions of developers that are using GitHub, right? You're getting the same issues as I6. Okay, I'm gonna deal with this after with you, Nick, if you can hold on. So there's an issue. There's a couple of issues to fix here. One thing is our routing, right? So remember how this works. If I go back, right? And notice I'm getting a 404 every single time. Projects and blah, blah, and whatever, right? There is no projects for ICE, right? Doesn't exist. Those don't exist anymore, right? But somehow I'm getting this thing. If I go to here, ICE 7B, and I get a page not found when I come up here, right? This slash gives me a page not found, right? Let's look and see what we're getting in the inspector. I mean, it worked locally, but remotely doesn't work, right? Why is that? And what's happening here when I try and log in? So log out, it says, okay, look, Durham Programmer, GitHub.io, login. There is no login, right? This is the problem. We have no login for this. Durham Programmer, GitHub.io. Login doesn't exist for my main file, but that's what login and logout do, right? So again, if I go back and if I put this in, I'm okay, but I get this 404 page not found. Let's take a look at our code and see why that's happening. And I'll talk about this with you guys, and we'll fix it tomorrow. So this is what we still have to fix. If you look at our app.js, and if you look, sorry, app.ts, and if you look down to where our active link is, it says if it's home, display home. But then we're saying, what about if it's a 404? 404 from our router, remember the router? It's detecting that there is no route. There is no route. And up at the top here, right, when we look at our route, our router.ts, this is live now, right? And we have a slash home, services about, all these things, right, in the router. And what it does is, remember what we're doing here, is we're using location.pathname. Let's just for now, let's put in a console log to help us out, help us troubleshoot online. So console log, and we'll look at the route that we're getting. So again, we're doing this on the TS side. I'm saving it. It's going to transpile. Notice it changed, right? I'm going to say git add dot git commit -m added console commands for troubleshooting. Git push. All right, and I'm doing this to show you that sometimes things work locally, but they don't work remotely, right? And they don't work remotely because, well, we made some assumptions, right? And our single page application works great locally, but remotely, no. We'll talk about how we can fix this in a sec. All right, so let's go back to GitHub now, and let's see how that is working. So refresh, all right? And first of all, did it update yet? It takes a second for it to propagate. I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to take a look at my commits, and you can see that this commit is also checkmarked. Added console commands for troubleshooting. There's a checkmark here. That means it's been converted. I can also check here and go to details for the page builds. It shows me my page build, and I can actually click on this. That's going to take me to the page. And then I want to look at my inspector and see what I have in my console. Wait, what? How am I getting a 404 page not found and no output? Fact, my router. Look at that. My router didn't work, right? At all, right? Because look, I mean, I expect that my router, when it comes here to my console log, this part right here, right? I'm going to do a route. Here's my route, and I'm getting at my active link. It's either this or home. And somehow my router.js, my router.ts is being ignored, right? And one way to check this, because if it wasn't being ignored, it would be there, right? One way to check this is go to sources. This is the one I'm looking at online now, okay? And then we'll stop for the day, okay? 'Cause we're going to fix this tomorrow. So if I go to scripts, and if I go down, here's my router.ts. Here it is. It's been converted, right? You can also see that down in here, I've got a console log command. This is up online, all right? And what about my index.html file? Index.html file is here. It goes stats./scripts router.js. Yeah, there's my router.js. It looks at scripts, looks at router, right? And what's going on? What did I do wrong, right? Because something's not right, because it doesn't know what to do, right? And I mean, it's clear that when I come down to this, my routing table is non-functional, because if you think about it, right, I went right after this is my to-do. I made a router, right? And I came down to print out my route, and I got nothing. I got nothing. All right, that's interesting. How about, let's do some other logs. Console.log, and I want to print out router. So router is this, router, lowercase r. So instead of route, I want to see the router itself down in here. I want to see it. I want to see what this is. Core.router, right? Again, it's going to transpile, and you can see that core.router is right here. That's what router is, right? And one thing to check is if we're exporting. So I know we have exported, but let's just check anyway. So we have the export keyword in front of the class. Here's my namespace core. So what the heck is going on, right? Why is this not happening? Why is my active link 404? It's like not finding the location path name at all. Okay, so let's put this up on GitHub. Git add dot, git commit -m, more troubleshooting. Git push. It's out. Let's go and check it out online. And see what the issue could be. So again, we're going to just, this is local. We don't care about TypeScript. This is also local. And I want to look at my Durham stuff. There's 7B. I want to look at my console. Here's some console commands that are from, it says optimizely, right? It's blocked. Our stats, this is from GitHub. Give me a couple of errors, stats.ts. Notice that TS is there, right? And I didn't do anything there. Okay, cool, I like it, and I have my active deployment. Here's my active deployment. And I want to view my deployment, which is the one I just deployed, right? So I can show all my environments and I can show my deployment. So view my deployment. Goes back to page not found. I'm okay with that. We haven't changed anything. Let's inspect the page. Let's go to console. And let's go to any one of these things, right? To see what happened, to see what's going on, right? So do you see any place that router is being called? Do you see it? It only happens on a fresh load. Okay, so what if I go refresh? Then I get this. There is no page that goes login, right? Even if I try and get there, let's say if I try and go to the page, here's my fresh load. I try and go to the page, I get this. For the first time, I get this router. Here's my router. And it says that, hey, cool, I got this active link is 404, right? And all right, cool. Let's see what the path name is, right? Because remember, we can just do it from here. We don't have to go into our page, right? So let's go back into here, and when we say location.pathname, what is the location.pathname? Location.pathname. This, my friends, that's the location.pathname, right? What the heck? Why is it like this, right? Well, you see, when we were doing this stuff, these are our routes, a routing table, yeah. But this location.pathname is everything, including the path, right? So that's something to note. So that's why it's skipping out. It's saying it's a 404 because this is not correct. Okay, this is incorrect. What other location things can we get? So location dot, I put the location in there. It says, here's my location, right? And the location variable gives us a bunch of different things, right? It gives us /github.io or whatever, and it gives us this part, protocol, and these are the hash, if there's a hash, the host as an example, and the path name that includes the name of the project, okay? That's what it includes, the name of the project between these two areas here, right? Or before we didn't have that. We didn't have that because locally on my project, right, we don't have this project name whatsoever. The path name doesn't include this, right? So one thing is the path name includes both the project, right, as well as the actual link, right? That's the project name. That's part of the path. We don't have it locally, but it exists remotely. So when we come back tomorrow, we can think about methods of fixing this problem. But you can see right now we got some more information on what this could be possibly happening. This is why it's not working. It's trying to do something with us. And what we need to do is when we do a route, we need to do a fully qualified path name, not just the routing list that we get from up here. This is part of the route, but the other part of the route is this part when we're up online. All right, so this is something we have to consider. All right, any other issues? Well, one thing to note is we can also get other informations here. We can get our navigation, our navigator. Navigator gives us a bunch of stuff, right? So it tells us the vendor, it tells us the type of browser that I'm using, Chrome 89. It's telling me a bunch of different things we talked about before, the user agent string, and a bunch of other stuff. So there's nothing really here that's inside of the browser that can help us, right? We also have a history object. So if I do history, and if I press the history object in there, you can see that in the history, I have a length of 8. As an example, there's 8 little, my history object has different states, right? So if I do history dot, and if I look at back, length, forward, and push state, replace state, if I look at state, you know, as an example, I want to see the history state. Right now, there's a null state. If I go back, right, so I want to do a back, it goes back to the previous thing, like pressing the back button. So all those things are working as they should. And the reason why we're not getting this working is because what this should be, right, is it's trying to go somewhere that doesn't exist. We have no way of going somewhere. There is no login. It doesn't exist. There's no way of interpreting this thing at all. Okay. So again, we're going to fix this tomorrow. So that's it for today. I want to point this out to you because we have this problem with our single page application that we've written so far. Locally, it works great, right? Locally, it works fantastic. And if I look in my inspector for my local thing, when it's working, running locally. So if I go to, I think it might have crashed. Let me just go to running it locally here, just a moment. So there we go. No problem, right? Here's my router. My router is there for every link. Look, here's my router for every link, but the page's not loading, right? For that one, here it is. And here's my routing. Here's my active link is home. Look how it says my active link is home. So that is something to think about. Active link is home. But if I type in active link and press enter, now my active link is contact, right? That's what the router is there for. The router is there to make sure that I go to the right place when I'm trying to get there from the first time. And if I log in, if I go log in and press admin, right? Then again, when I go there, my active link is contact list, right? That's my active link. It interprets what I'm doing, right? So I got to take that information, whatever the path name is, and I want to add that contact list to it. That's the fully qualified path name. It's not enough for me to get, you know, the slash and whatever. It's just everything else before it. And usually what it is the project name. Whatever the project name is, we can probably fix it that way. All right, we'll talk about this tomorrow. But that's it for me today. Any questions about what we did today so far? We successfully converted our project from JavaScript to TypeScript. That's what we did. These are all TypeScript files now. My problem isn't TypeScript. My problem is a single page application that doesn't seem to want to work. All right, any questions before we go? All right, guys. Thank you so much then. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. And I'll thank you so much for everything. And we'll talk soon. Take care. I'm going to stop recording this now. Now it's not